This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work with another response to a question, an AskProfWolff question from our Patreon community. This question comes from John Ferrer, and it concerns the relationship between the anarchist theoretician and leader Mikhail Bakunin and Karl Marx. And so it opens the whole space for a discussion of the relationship between anarchism and Marxism. And like all the great questions about Marxism and anarchism, it is subject to the different understandings of what those terms mean, to the different interpretations of the philosophies of these two major figures from the 19th century. It also is complicated by the fact that Marx and Bakunin worked together to start the International back in the middle of the 19th century, knew each other, worked with each other, and had a kind of theoretical alliance coupled with strong disagreements. So I will not pretend, as I think many others have, that what I'm about to say is the word on the subject. Everybody's interpretation is just that, an interpretation, and mine is no different in that it's an interpretation based on a way of reading what these two thinkers had to say. So here's the gist of it. What both men agreed on, and what anarchists and Marxists often agree on to this day, is the critique of capitalism and the sense that society could and should do better than capitalism. That is, both Marxism and anarchism have a deep, long-lasting commitment to socialism as the name of the next system, the system we can build on the basis of capitalism and yet break from capitalism to something that's better for most people. A further area of agreement between Marxists and anarchists, at least most of the time, has been that the state is part of what has to go, that the function of the state is to reproduce the dominant class structure. So in capitalism, the state is the servant of capitalism. Its activities, however it pretends to represent everybody, are mainly geared to reproducing the dominant position of capitalists within a capitalist system. In a way, slave states reproduce slavery, states in the feudal period reproduced feudalism, and states in the capitalist era reproduce capitalism. And that therefore the state is the enemy of both anarchists and Marxists because of its role as a major support for capitalism's reproduction. So then where do they disagree? Their major disagreement is on what Marx sometimes referred to as the role of a state that could represent the working class during an intermediate period from the collapse of capitalism when the state no longer reproduced it, but before the establishment of socialism, there would need to be a state that could serve the interests of an emerging socialism by blocking the use of the state to reproduce capitalism. In other words, Marx's notion of the state as existing in a transitional period was not an endorsement of the state or a thought that the state should exist within socialism, but should be a tool, a way for the working class to have more power to make the transition from capitalism to socialism. This was anathema to Bakunin, who wanted a direct and pretty much immediate assault on the state to get rid of it, and that was not acceptable, Marx's idea of a temporary transitional role for a state or a state apparatus. And so that has remained part of the opposition that is often found alongside the alliance between anarchists and Marxists. Some of you may have heard the phrase, the withering away of the state, and you may know that that was an objective of the Soviet Bolsheviks who made the revolution there in 1917. The very phrase, withering away of the state, was a statement by their leader, Lenin, to underscore that their objective as Marxists included the removal of a state from the society because you were getting rid of the class opposition between capitalists and workers, and therefore did not need a state apparatus to enforce that division. So then why the antagonism? Well, there are many reasons, not the least of which, particularly in the United States, has been that the Cold War, since 1945, in other words, a very long time, 75 years, was phrased as a war between the United States and the Soviet Union, between capitalism and socialism, and that therefore the great demon to be avoided was anything to do with socialism, and that usually meant Marxism and so on. Anarchism kind of got pushed to the side. It wasn't a large major movement. There was no society that embraced it as such. No leadership, since partly anarchists don't want that. And so it wasn't the subject of the same kind of persecution and hostility, even though there are plenty of moments in American history where anarchism was the designated demonization of choice at the time. So anarchism is a way for people to be leftist that at least raises the question here in the United States, what exactly is it? What does it mean? People believe they know what socialism means, Russia, China, Cuba, and so on. They believe they understand that. They don't quite get what anarchism is. Plus, there's this peculiar libertarian strain in the United States that makes hostility to the government attractive to Americans, and anarchism then becomes the left-wing version of all of that, and that may explain also why it resurges from time to time. The basic conclusion I draw from this is that Marxists and anarchists, socialists and anarchists, have much more in common than divides them. There ought to be, and there often has been.
I mean, I don't agree with that, actually. I think we have nothing in common. And the reason why I say that is that anarchists don't want you to do anything that actually is effective in fighting, right? Like, I don't care if you agree with me about some utopic fucking shit that's, 100 years in the future, or after, we win, right? We agree about what it would look like after we win. If every time I try to do anything, you're blocking it, like, you know what I mean? Or you're disagreeing with it, or you're sabotaging it from within, or you're betraying me to the security forces, or you're, it just doesn't, there's nothing, like, practically the alliance can't form because you just disagree with having alliances. How can you have an alliance with an anarchist group? Is each individual person going to sign the fucking agreement? Like, what if they break it? Having an enforcement mechanism when you break an agreement, that sounds like a state to me. So, like, what? I mean, I just don't agree. I think the problem is that we need to be concerned with actually doing shit in reality today, right now, collectively. And if you're just against organizing in such a way, then we can't even do step one. And that's why the CIA has always promoted anarchist viewpoints as much as they can, because it holds space on the left, and that space is held by ineffectiveness. And no threat. I mean, that's just, it's harsh but true.
Been practical collaborations, alliances, coalitions, between them for all kinds of fights against capitalism. Let them debate the pros and cons of a temporary transitional state. Let them debate the pros and cons of the withering away of the state, how that happens, how fast that happens, the forms it takes. That should not prevent the collaboration on the enormous areas of agreement that can be summarized as the critique of capitalism and the advocacy of a transition to socialism.
I think my main problem is like I think that a lot of people talk about anarchists versus socialists who have never read a history book or don't really know anything at all. So it's like kind of painful whenever somebody even asks me about it, because it's like, the truth is anarchists don't really think about that kind of thing. Like, you know, they don't really think about the practical reality of fighting a fucking war against the state. And they have childlike perspectives of what war means. And that's it. Or revolution.
This is Richard Wolff.
And they underestimate the deadliness of reactionary movements and counter-revolution and what that would look like. And it's just, like, what do you want me to do with that?
For democracy at work.
And like, some people are like, Mike, you should be more pro-anarchist. And it's like, why? Why? I don't want you guys going down that fucking route and wasting your time. Would you say anarchists like Noam Chomsky are controlled opposition? Here's what I would say. There's plenty of people who call themselves anarchists who have important things to say. I think that's what Richard Wolff was getting at. And I agree with him on that. There's a lot of people who call themselves anarchists who I like what they write, especially when they're analyzing capitalism or they are analyzing American foreign policy. The problem is their prescriptions are bad. It's like, if you don't like American foreign policy, like, you have to stop America. How do you stop America? You take control of the American state. You stop the American state. I like Chomsky until he writes off all past and existing socialism as right-wing or authoritarian. Yeah, of course. On the differences of anarchism and God, like, here's the reality: is the state, human beings accomplish big things the more they are organized, and the more they are working collectively. States are the largest organizations in the planet, and therefore the largest organizations of humanity. The idea that you could ignore that and then fight it as an individual is insane. Like, I'll give you an example that's very concrete. If you were to shoot Donald Trump in the head and kill Donald Trump, would the American government collapse? No. In fact, that wouldn't even matter. They would immediately have J.D. Vance sworn in 5 minutes, and then, you know, the American state would be unperturbed. It's, in fact, designed for the president to die. So, like, an individual act of attacking Donald Trump does not actually destroy the state. It's the same thing with Luigi, right? Luigi shot a healthcare CEO. What happened? In 5 minutes, there was an acting CEO and nothing changed. What changed for the policyholders of United Healthcare? You know, like, they just continued on. He was replaced. Allegedly. I don't know beyond in fact, I think it wasn't him, but, you know, I just said Luigi so you would understand what I'm talking about. In order to stop the American government, you have to take over the American government or dismantle the American government. If one wants to advance a program of conquering state power in order to wield it for socialist construction, while another wants to simply abolish the state in one stroke, where could there be any reconciliation? It's impossible to merge the two positions. I mean, I completely agree with that. It's just not possible to merge the positions. I don't know what else to say. One thing that changed was a public display of rage that was difficult to suppress for 3 or 4 months. And like most anarchists' expressions of anger, it dissipated over time because it wasn't channeled to any kind of organization. It's the same thing with Bernie Sanders and AOC fucking speeches. It's the same thing. If it's not channeled to an organization in a permanent structure, there's organizing. Like, we've talked about this before. There's a very famous clip about their China is winning. Okay, hold on, this is good. iShow Speed test drives the 1,500 horsepower electric car in China that has a retail price of only $70,000. He said he wants to buy it.
Car cost?
Retail is about $70,000.
70,000?
Yeah.
And it's faster than my Lamborghini.
Unfortunately, it is.
And it's electric?
All right, so I'm doing a little bit of acceleration. Hold
Let me see. Oh!
So
damn.
that's all.
Whoa!
I won't do any faster than that. Quite rapid.
Bro, ain't no way! Yo!
Maybe a little more.
Yeah.
Up to 70.
Bro, hold on. Time out. Wait.
Please.
Yo, ain't no way!
All right, ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
You can feel the camera like it's
and it costs 70,000?
70,000. Yeah.
That's it? Chat, my Lamborghini costs $250,000.
Model S Plaid in China costs about 100, a bit more, 120.
What the hell? Car cost?
Yeah, somebody was like, Chinese princelings are going to feed speed with Chinese capitalism. Honestly, that would be even more hilarious.